Welcome to the Nuclear Snail channel. This episode is about this post-apocalyptic trench maze and why I think those are really underappreciated in the post-apocalyptic genre. I have two main reasons for that and also some interesting history from the First World War, where these were used a lot. Whenever I see a post-apocalyptic maze or something of the sort, it's usually big and huge and like really fantasy-ish. And it's fine, it's the rule of cool, and of course I also like that kind of aesthetic as well. However, I wanted to build something more realistic. And yes, there are a couple of builds out there. I'm not saying I'm the first one or the only one who've done something like this. And of course there are also historical examples from the First World War and even medieval times, although they didn't necessarily use hex nuts as maze heads. But anyway, when I say that these are underappreciated in a post-apocalyptic setting, I am referring specifically to the fact that you will rarely see something like this used in works of fiction or on costumes when something like this is of an actually reasonable size and weight and balance and all of that. Now, this one is 50 centimeters long and weighs overall about 360 grams, which for a mace is really on the lighter side. To those people who do not know that much about medieval weapons, it's not as light as you think it is. If you thought that a usual mace is like 5 kilograms or something, basically a dumbbell mounted on a stick, it wasn't. Typically, the total weight of a mace of about a kilogram or so would be quite reasonable. Mace heads would be typically 200 grams up to 400, maybe 500 grams, it depends, but there were also historical examples that were really close to this, even a bit shorter though. But this head, for example, I weighed it before mounting it. The head weighs 90 grams. There are historical Viking brass maces that were this light. It is not unheard of in the medieval times. They would be shaped differently. Again, this is a modern version because this is like a modern plumbing nut from a construction store. I'm not sure, maybe there were also some maces with a hexagonal shape, but I have never seen one like this in medieval context. But regardless, this weight is reasonable. And why is it reasonable and what can I do with this? Well, first of all, the usual way someone would wield a mace is, unlike with the sword where you could do strikes like this, which I can do with this super light mace by the way, with a mace you would just continue moving. I'm just showing you how fast this thing can be moved around. It might look awkward because I'm staring into the camera. It actually has the reasons so I don't smash the camera by accident, okay? This thing moves fast, and if you can move something fast, then you don't need that much weight to create a lot of damage. And this is really fast and I love it. I love how it balances, I love how it is really fluid. It's not feeling at all like, but it does feel like a sharp punch. It feels like it would really, when it comes to melee weapons, I really like agile weapons. And this fits the bill. Now, this would of course not do as much damage as a heavier mace on impact when swung with the same speed, and I do not have a possibility to really test it on one of those super expensive skull analogs or whatever. It's not really in the budget for me, so sorry about that. But I think this would really do damage. And again, there is historical precedence for maces like this, although those were probably not main maces that were used against heavy armor or whatever. But anyway, this right here is also really easy to make. That's the reason number 2 why I think those are really underappreciated in the post-apocalyptic setting. Because all it needs is a stick and a piece of metal. It doesn't really need to be good metal, hardened steel or whatever. It can be steel, can be iron, can be softer metals such as copper, bronze, what have you. Because it's a blunt implement. It is not trying to cut into anything. They would use it against chainmail, by the way, so the chainmail would remain intact mostly. It wouldn't break the chainmail, it would just, despite the chainmail, still damage the guy. So These are really anti-armor weapons, or they were used as such. Although not only. Now we get to the historical part. In the First World War, they would use those for trench raiding, which is where they would raid another opposing country's army's trench at night usually. They wouldn't use guns to remain stealthy, and they also would work in really confined spaces. So this is actually about 10 centimeters longer than the average trench club in the First World War. Obviously there were some that were this length, there were some that were a lot shorter, just 30 centimeters, and the average was 40. This one is 50. And I felt like this balance is just right and has a good reach, and with this long a lever for such a small weight, I can really accelerate the weight really well. Again, perfect balance for me. Now, they would smack the other enemy, they would smack the enemies on the head with this, killing or at least incapacitating them. Apparently this was more useful than daggers. Go figure. So they used those a lot. They would improvise them from whatever was around. Sometimes they would have an empty grenade shell as the head, and they would usually be, again, a bit shorter and somewhat heavier. In the First World War, where there was a ceasefire and soldiers from both sides decided that screw the war, on Christmas Eve we're just gonna not shoot at each other but play soccer against each other and drink tea together, do some other festive activities, that went down in history. And that is the reason why whenever I think about trench clubs, I think about Christmas. Let me now show you the features of this up close, starting with this handle wrapping. It's just some some thin belt, because this is already 3 centimeters thick in diameter. This is perfect for me / average dude to grab. And this doesn't add too much thickness, but it adds those bumps here when the belt parts overlap. And also the texture of this makes it easier to hold on to. And I've added some additional wrapping to the butt end here, so there is like an additional slip stop, if you will. This is held in place by double-sided adhesive tape, and here as well as here and here you can see some tiny carpenter nails additionally holding the wrapping in place. There is also some other wrapping up here, and this one is just some thin cord which are wrapped around this part that has cracked, both for optical reasons and also to hold it together better. However, I think this crack doesn't really compromise the capacity of this bludgeoning instrument. How it happened is, like, the way this is held is this knot fits, this one was actually fitting too loosely over this, so I've wrapped one layer of duct tape around and then I screwed it on. But this is mostly held in place by this wedge spreading the end of this, so I cannot for the life of me pull this off. This is really lodged in there. And this is exactly what I want. However, in the process of hitting the wedge into it, I found out that the slot I've sewn was too narrow and the wedge was too wide for it, so I have this crack here. Again, it's along the grain and any forces coming would be across the grain, and I don't see how this would really compromise the strength of this. But both for cooler looks and visual balance, because we have some wrapping here, some wrapping here, this is all not so barren, but that's some detail. I think this looks cool. And also for structural reasons, should it try to break apart, this cord will hopefully help hold it together. So this is one of those details that is both kind of realistic and cool looking. So yeah, that is this. The nut I've sanded a bit and then applied some spray paint, which I've also then wiped and sanded off as it was drying to add this sort of old look. There is also some fabric paint applied to the handle. You cannot see it, but you would see it if it wasn't there. Then the handle would really look way too new. And I also applied some wood stain to the wood. This is not ash, which would have been ideal in Europe, but in America it would be hickory that would be ideal. This is beech, which is also really good hard wood, but really, First World War, they would use whatever they had around. Because these things would be really easy to make from really available materials, really cheap to maintain, if you would maintain it at all, rather than chucking it away and making a new one. It's an enormous amount of bang for the buck. It's not the best weapon around for sure, but as cheap as it is, and as easy to make as it is, this would be one of the go-to things in a post-apocalyptic scenario. So, I hope this was interesting and entertaining and maybe a bit educational as well. In the spirit of bludgeoning trench Christmas, I wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and a Happy New Year. And if you're not supporting me on Patreon yet, it's time to do it. It's linked in the video description. And also linked in the video description is the Nuclear Snail community group, which you can join and don't miss updates and post your stuff and see what other people say about your stuff and so on and so forth. So, I will see you next time. Have fun crafting, hail the snail, and yeah, bye!